All right. Well, hi, folks. It's going on 1 o'clock, and I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name's Max Morris, Principal Program Manager, the Windows team. I work on devices and networking experiences. Been working on devices and networking experiences for a while now. Before Windows 8, I was in the Windows 7 team, where I was one of the PMs who headed up the device stage system and those sets of features, working with a number of our other colleagues on the overall device experience system, device metadata system. I've got Eugene Lin here, who is one of the colleagues who worked on that at the time as well, Windows 7. And together, he and I and a number of other folks on our team have been working on this new concept that we're introducing to you folks this week called Metro-style apps for devices. How many folks had a chance to go to Eugene's talk yesterday, which was introducing Metro-style device apps? Just a raise of hands. Okay, good, some of you. I'm going to recap some of the stuff that was talked about, that he talked about yesterday, briefly, and then I'm going to get into a bit of the details. So the agenda really, where's my clicker? There we go. Is first going to spend a little bit of time talking, again, recapping what Eugene talked about, which is differentiating devices using Metro-style apps. Then I'm going to kind of get into a little bit of the details under the covers. This is a session to kind of get into some of the how-to. We're going to spend some time looking at the anatomy of one of these things and how all the different parts come together. And then talk about some sort of ideas and recommendations and some considerations that we'd like you to keep in mind when you're thinking about developing a device experience, really kind of taking the development life cycle as a way to look at that. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. I wanted to sort of not have a very long conversation in terms of just presenting and then let folks ask questions. Some of you have probably worked on device metadata and device experiences before already with Windows 7, and some of you this is going to be new for you. And so we're going to have some time to take some questions. We've got a couple of people from the team. My goal here for you today is to leave with some examples of how to create a Metro-style device app, as well as how to make a great device experience for Windows 8. And really the theme here is that it's really all about what you can create, and you don't have to spend as much time thinking about some of the problems that have been there before about distribution. So we've really tried to take on that problem full center with Windows 8 using the Metro-style app model and combining that with the system that may be familiar to some of you around device metadata to provide a full system for distributing an experience to your customers that's comprised of both devices, drivers, device metadata, and app. There are some things in that are kind of linkages across the system because we have a lot of components that have been around for a while, and we don't want to change those because they work pretty well and we've got familiar tools for them. And then some new things that we're introducing, and so typically we have to blend these things together. So the conversation here is about how to do that and how Windows can help make that easy for you. Let me talk a little bit about what a Metro-style device app actually is. How many folks have kind of been going to some of the other sessions on what a Metro-style app is? So not everyone, great, so a number of folks. So I really encourage you to go and take a look at some of the other sessions if you haven't had a chance to, particularly if you're primarily focused on hardware. Our story really is about blending devices and apps together. And so we want you to think about what it means to think about apps first. And so I want to lead out with the concept of what a Metro-style device app is. It's really your code. It's your code in customers' hands, put there, we hope, automatically, seamlessly, without anybody having to think about it. It just happens. Unlike, for example, with Device Stage and other types of systems, you actually own all the pixels. It's just a Metro-style app. It happens to be your app, and it happens to be connected to your device. But it's a Metro-style app. You own everything that's going on in it. We have a number of built-in experiences in Windows that you can leverage. Some of them are about devices. I'll talk about a few of them. Some of them are beyond devices, and there are other sessions that are talking about those. I'll mention a couple of them as we go through this. You have the opportunity to really use custom functionality for your device and driver. If you have a scenario where you have a custom device and you have an app that is an app or an experience that you want to have just uniquely integrated, for example, you have a product that really you can't kind of tell the difference between the device and the app because they're kind of all the same thing. We've got a model that helps you take a look at how to do that. Today, there's a session going on, if you haven't heard about this already, which is about dealing with specialized devices. George Rousas is one of our colleagues who's been working on that, and you can get a lot of detail in that session, and if you can't attend it, that'll be online. And there's also a couple of documents coming out there about how you can uniquely integrate your device and your app together. One of the things that we'll talk about here, and what George goes into a lot more detail in, is this notion of privilege and restriction. And this idea that you can actually restrict functionality on your driver and have your app be privileged uniquely to use that functionality so that no other app can take advantage of some cool things that your device might be able to do. And finally, one of the things we got a lot of feedback on going back in Windows 7 and even before is how do we make it easier for device developers who have apps and experiences that they want to light up? How can they just leverage our common tool story? By going with Metro-style apps for devices, the full tool suite that's going to be available for Metro-style apps for Microsoft and any other third party, you can actually take advantage of and use. Excuse me. Let's take a look at this without further ado and just give you an example of what a Metro-style app looks like. I'm actually going to start out with something a little bit different from the LifeCam Studio and just show you. There's another session tomorrow from one of our other colleagues, Mark Potier, who's going to be talking about printing. I'm not going to steal too much of his thunder here, but one of the things you may have seen in the keynote is Mike Angiulo printing a document, like I think it was an aircraft, and being a little paper airplane, and then being able to use an HP printer in a very kind of cool way. So here on the start screen, you can see on the fourth from the left, the tile for HP. This is an example of a Metro-style device app. And if I open it, it's just an app. It can do all sorts of cool things. And I'm not going to get into all the details here, but this is just an interesting app, and it does things. And in certain places, it extends the experience, but it's just hanging out right there on the start screen. Now, let me get into another view and talk about LifeCam Studio. LifeCam is a product from Microsoft. It's just a nice little webcam. And of course, the tablets that you got from Samsung and us have a couple of webcams already included in them. But here I'm using a nice, very high definition webcam. And our colleagues over in Microsoft Hardware have put together a device, a Metro-style device app for their camera. So you can see here, if I scroll along on the start screen, there is their app, LifeCam. And turns out that if I open that up, they haven't done a whole lot of cool things yet, because one of the places that they've really invested for now is actually in the extension experience of the webcam. So in Windows, we have a camera control. I'm going to get into that right here, and here I am, and here you all are. And so this is the camera, and I can take pictures. And so let's go ahead and take a picture. And yeah, that's not so interesting, because it kind of doesn't look very cool. So it turns out that between the hardware and the software of LifeCam, they have a driver here. It's a driver package, and this driver package actually contains a special media foundation transform that works with the under-the-covers components of the media team that actually gets into the pipeline and can apply effects. So it's distributed in a driver package, and it's just an MFT. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit detail later, but let's take a look at what it does. I think some of you may have seen what happened with Mike Angiulo. Loads up their app, and you know, I need to have a green hat right now because I'm a little bit boring. So there, a little bit more interesting. Maybe I want to swirl my face around a little bit. There's a lot of things that I can do. Some of these things have to do with the actual driver software. Some of these things have to do with the lower level component and giving instructions down to the device. And so here you can see a bunch of custom functionality that is unique to this device, that's implemented both in the device and a component that comes down in a driver package that gets properly installed with elevation and all of those things in Windows. And here is a Metro-style app, a device app, that knows how to take unique advantage of that functionality and deliver some really cool benefit to the end user in context, in the right place, that any developer can easily get access to by calling a simple API in the Windows runtime. So that's pretty cool. So let me go ahead and put a red hat on, see if I can do something fun. Did it take it? No. There we go. Snap. Well, that's good enough for today. There's my new log on tile. So how did that all come together, right? That's what we're going to get into in a few minutes. Let's go back to the presentation. You can see that some of these sort of principles that we're talking about that I mentioned a little bit before, they're taking advantage of in this app. And as we go through the session today, I'm going to keep referring back to that app kind of as a reference point in your mind, and that device driver, and that device, and its device metadata package to help orient us as we're kind of deconstructing this. In that app, they controlled all the pixels. They did a lot of cool stuff. We're going to take a look at about how they did some of that. They used some familiar languages and common tools. They just did this with our Visual Studio tools. In this case, LifeCam is not integrating services from the web, but in that other example, the HP app, they do all sorts of stuff with the internet. And they've integrated in Windows appropriately in places where it matters through app contracts, just like anybody else can. There's the clicker. So a couple things you can think about doing with an app to differentiate your device. Windows will make sure your app gets installed with your device when your device is set up seamlessly and easily. And you may have seen that yesterday in Eugene's presentation. Your app can access functionality that you restrict and that you can then privilege to your app alone so that no one else can do the cool things that your device enables except you. That's pretty compelling from a value proposition point of view. And finally, your app can participate in experiences that are appropriate, and we have several of them, that make sense for where you can fit in and how you can kind of deliver extra value to users. And that's really the key thing, is that these experiences can be extended in a very natural way in context where it makes where it makes sense. Let me give you now a list of some of the built-in experiences for devices that we have. These are just the ones for devices. We have many of them, these contracts in Windows. Some of the other contracts are search and share and other things like that. And your app can, of course, participate in those contracts, and you please should consider doing that. But these are the built-in experiences that are really targeted for devices that we have right now in Windows 8. Printing, Play To, Capture, Connecting, and Sharing. And what LifeCam is doing is they're really extending that capture experience as I kind of went through. Let's kind of start to break this down a little bit and understand what the anatomy of a device experience actually is. I'm going to try to use some graphics to kind of keep us organized because there's a lot of moving parts in this system. So try to remember what some of these sort of icons look like. We've got on the left, we've got the device. Again, think about this generally, but I'm using a specific example for this discussion to kind of help keep us oriented. Excuse me. Next thing is a device driver. In this case, this driver is a driver package that contains that special MFT transform. The next is a Metro-style app. That was the LifeCam Studio app that you saw that was installed on the start screen. And finally, a device metadata package, which we haven't looked at yet, but it's there under the covers. Let's talk about device metadata for a minute. How many folks are familiar with the device metadata concept? And so how many of you it's new for? Quite a few. So device metadata is a new thing that is a thing that we introduced in Windows 7, so it's not that new now, but it was new to Windows 7. And it was really a way of helping Windows understand at a user experience level what the device was all about. Prior to having a device metadata system, we really didn't understand very much about devices except through Device Manager. And you kind of had to elevate and get in there, and users just didn't do it and they didn't understand it. So we introduced two features in Windows 7. One was the Devices and Printers folder, and the other was Device Stage, that allowed the Windows itself to actually know more about what that device did and how it was represented and what its type was. Devices we think of as humans. So here's LifeCam, and it's just an object. It's a physical thing. But in Windows, devices are actually modeled as logical functions. And so what the device metadata system does is it helps us create a construct of a device as a thing, as a physical piece of plastic, as we would say. And then all of the functions that are bound together inside of that piece of plastic and how they all work together. And so it helps us associate all the different dev nodes and all the interfaces and all those things that, and potentially different types of drivers that may be installed for that particular device, all the things that come together that actually represent that logical function. And the device metadata then describes actually how that, what we call device container, works. And so there's a bunch of information in the device metadata package that helps us understand that device container concept. I'm not going to go through all the details here. We've got a lot of documentation on this. But one thing to remember about it is it's just a bunch of XML files, some graphics files. They're all wrapped up together in a format that is the cabinet format. So that's kind of one of the old school tools that we have around. It's not like the new app model format. But it really contains all this information. It goes through the Microsoft pipeline. It can get signed. It gets distributed through an automatic system. It gets installed when the device is actually set up. We're reusing the device metadata system to help us bind the Metro-style device app to the actual device container that is the logical representation in Windows of your device. Let's talk about now how that works. The first thing, this is going to be a little bit basic for some of you, but bear with me because I want to make sure that we kind of follow the bouncing ball here. First thing that's important is to actually have an identity for that piece of plastic. So you may have multiple interfaces, you may have multiple dev nodes, but on one of them, we're hoping that you're going to have a plug-and-play ID, and this is a fairly well-behaved ID. There's a couple of other options out there, like a model ID and some things like that. I'm just going to generally refer to this as the device ID. And when that device is connected to Windows, one of the first things that happens over that bus is that we pick up that device ID and we read it in. We may read in multiple device IDs, and we kind of bring them all together for that device container. But one of them is interesting to us in particular, because that's the device ID that we're going to use to go fetch drivers, to go fetch the device metadata package with. We may fetch multiple drivers for multiple device IDs, but the one that's really interesting is the device ID that we're going to use to get device metadata with. For the sake of this discussion, let's assume there's just one device ID, one driver, just to keep it simple. There's another identity out there that we call the device experience ID. In Windows 7, some of you may remember that the service actually is the thing that created this for you. In Windows 8, you can create it. You can just use a standard tool, hopefully a well-behaved tool to generate a GUID, and take that GUID and put it in the device metadata package. This effectively then becomes the label or the moniker that we know your device metadata package by. We use it to do two things. First thing that you need to do, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, is you take that device experience ID and you put it into a file, we call it the store manifest file, in your app package. That helps us know that your app goes with your device experience. The second thing is, of course, you take that device experience ID and you put it in the device metadata package, because that's the thing that effectively names the device metadata package. Let's now bring these things together on the back end. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to present your device and your device driver to WinQual for certification, verification, make sure that it's well behaved. If you're using an inbox driver, or for example, if you're using a network service and you don't really need a driver and PMPX is enough, you don't need to have the driver certified because you don't have one that you're giving to us. So that step doesn't matter. But you do need to sort of let us know about that device somehow. If you are doing a custom driver package, then at that point we'll sign it. It'll be ready to go. Then it's time to go ahead and produce that device metadata package. And we'll take a look at that device ID, device experience ID. But before we do that, you need to actually submit your app to the store. So your app goes into the store next. And at that point in time, we actually verify the binding between the ID that's in your app and the ID that's in the metadata package. And at that point, we go ahead and complete the processing on the device metadata package and sign it, and it's now available. So we'll take questions later. Come back to the slide if you'd like. Now on the client side, here's how this works. The user connects the device to Windows. The device ID is read during setup. Just like we talked about earlier, it's picked up off of that bus. And simultaneously, the metadata will be found. The driver will be found. Those are matched based on the device ID. And we actually kick off both of these things now in parallel in Windows 8. There we go. From the metadata then, the device experience ID is found. And inside of the metadata is a forward link, a binding to the app identifier. And it's the identifier that is used in the store to actually identify the app. And we read that out of the metadata. And we go to the store silently and acquire the app and install it onto the start screen without any further work. There's no prompt to the user. There's no notification to the user. It just happens. So now all the components are installed on Windows. We have a driver, we have a metadata package, and we have an app. They're all sort of linked together, and Windows knows about all of them. And now the user runs the app. And that app, because of the metadata system and the tight linkage through signatures, is able to uniquely use restricted functionality on that driver if it's been locked down. And the second thing is activation of specific contracts is automated. So just like you saw a moment ago, I'm there looking at my picture using the LifeCam Studio camera. And when I hit the settings button, their app ran. I didn't, as a user, have to select it. It was definitely theirs because we know about it under the covers in the system because of all these pointers. And we also know about the correct entry point, and we know that it's available. So let's then think about how this all unfolds in terms of how you think about how to make that come together. I'm just going to pop up the development lifecycle then for you folks to think about. This is pretty familiar, but it's a useful tool to employ to think about how you have to plan all this stuff to come together because there's quite a few moving parts. First, let's start with planning. Step back when you're thinking about making a device experience and really think hard about how you want it to come together. You need to think about how your software and hardware really are going to work together to differentiate the experience. And think about also then what you need to have in terms of your driver and how that driver will work together with your device to, if it's custom, get certified for Windows 8, because that's one of the requirements that we have here for the Metro-style device apps. In the case of LifeCam, one of the things that they did was they thought about all of the unique functionality they have, the swirls, the red hats. It's one of the differentiating hallmarks of their offering. And they looked at how they could make that available in the correct capture experience. And so they planned that from the beginning, and they thought about it. Same thing with our folks who are working on printing. And any of the other scenarios, you can take a look and see how your app and your device can come together. And when you think about your app, think also about anything that you have out on the internet, such as services or other offerings, because what a Metro-style app is great at is pulling in the web and making it really come alive on Windows. When you're thinking about your app, think about how you're going to leverage that functionality. We have a couple of different mechanisms for how that works in the platform. Some of them are easier, some of them are a little bit more challenging and require some more work. But across the board, we have quite a lot of support for helping you get access to custom functionality in your device. And if you don't need to do that, then you don't have to worry about it. You can just use your device using our standard APIs. And then finally, with the metadata system, one of the things that the metadata system does is it targets different geographies and different locales. One of the things that we've done in Windows 8 compared to Windows 7 is that we've made it now possible for one single device metadata package to support all locales that you care about. That's very different from Windows 7, where we had each package having to represent one locale and you had to handle multiple packages simultaneously. So now with multi-locale support, you do need to think about how you might want to localize things. You also might want to think about what down-level support is important to you if you want this device to work at all on Windows 7, because this is where you might think about programming the device experience for Windows 7. Let's then move on to actually creating the experience. Depends on how you factor your functionality about whether you implement the functionality in the device or if you're actually implementing your driver, or if you split it between the two. But as you create this, really create these in combination with one another. Let's take a look at now how the webcam, the LifeCam team did this. I'm going to just pop over to a little bit of code, getting a little bit technical here for a minute. So you can see here in this first green box, this is the driver, INF, for their device. And we can see there their device identifier, and that's the VidPid pairing for the device that connects over USB. And of course, the INF is very, very long, and it wouldn't fit on, I don't know, even in like 1-point type, it wouldn't fit on that screen. But one of the things that they're doing that I pulled out was where they're actually registering their special Media Foundation transform. And they're doing some registry additions where they actually let us know where the interfaces are to get access to, so that when it's time, we can actually dip into their driver in the appropriate place in their driver package, which really is going to be installed as a set of DLLs, as you can see here, to find, for example, the visual effects and how to configure those visual effects. So, and of course, there's a bunch of other things in that driver package that this INF commands Windows to install with elevated privilege. And so that's what's going on when that driver gets laid down. Next thing is think about how your app is going to then use that device and support all the appropriate app contracts that you think are interesting that you can light up. So I'll just remind you, someone who's much better looking than me, this is a pretty good picture of him. There's what the LifeCam Studio can do. Lots of interesting effects. Squiggle face is being turned on here. So again, just reminding you, this is an app contract inside of a standard Windows control. This could be your own app as well. Could be a different app. Could be a third-party app. Opening that up. How do they do that? Well, again, I want to come back to that point I made earlier about the binding between the device metadata package and the actual app. So in the application package itself, there's a special file that device apps have to provide called the store manifest.xml file. No other apps really need to provide this. And it's a very simple XML schema, as you can see. And really the only thing that's important to add is the GUID for your device experience. So that's the first thing that LifeCam did, and this is actually from their app. And for folks who've already taken a look at the Metro-style apps and have gotten a little bit under the covers, there's an AppX manifest file. And this is the app manifest, as people have been talking about, where you might be able to edit this in the app manifest editor and the Visual Studio tools. And there's lots of things that you can do here. This is where you decide to have your app or show your app as participating in the share contract or the search contract or things like that. Here, LifeCam is participating in the camera settings contract. as I said earlier. So that's all they have to do to say this is our executable and this is how you get into it, and that's about it. And they didn't have anything else they had to do that was any different from any other Metro style app. And that's a key point I want to keep making, which is that it's just a Metro style app. There's really nothing unique about this Metro style device app. Our colleagues in Microsoft Hardware have taken advantage of the XAML support we have. It just happens to be how they've implemented it. You might choose to do that, or you might choose to use the WWA model, so using HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript for presentation. In their case, they chose to implement that effects panel that you saw earlier using XAML. But any presentation layer that you choose will work fine. Again, it's just a Metro style app, and you get to make that decision. Here's a little bit of a code snippet from their XAML where they've got the dashboard view put together. And you can see in here, and of course it goes on, and I didn't want to pull everything out, but you can see here where they're actually building up the effects layout. It's just standard XAML. And under the covers, what they're doing is they're reaching down to another layer under the covers that actually then talks down to that special functionality that really no one else can get access to. But at the top edge and in general, the model is just the same as any other Metro style app. Then the next thing comes down to implementing the device metadata package and putting device metadata together. And there's a couple of key things that you have to do if you're doing a device metadata package targeting a Metro-style device app for Windows 8. We've actually made it pretty simple if you're just doing that. If you're looking at more complexity, for example, supporting Windows 7, supporting device stage, which we totally support backwards compatibility of from the same device metadata package, there's a bit more work to do. But focusing just on Metro-style device apps, we've introduced a new tool, the Device Metadata Authoring Wizard, that really just kind of walks you through the basics and the complete basics of what you need to do to bind your device to your Metro-style device app. I'm not going to walk through all of this. This is going to be available for you now in the WDK. So it's actually published now, so you can go get this and pull it down and start playing with it today. It's available. With lots of samples. The sample for the LifeCam I don't think is included, but there are many other samples for different device classes available that you can take a look at. So you can see that as the developer goes along and interacts with the wizard, there you can see that the icons are provided. There's a bit of a summary of that, all the different sizes. So there's a little bit of validation going on in real time to help make sure that you've sort of hit all the things that you need to do to put this together. And what's great about this is it saves you from having to interpret all of the XML and all the different structures and interweavings that we sort of had you have to know a little bit about in Windows 7. So this tool just makes it really easy to take Metro-style app and bring it together with your device. And here you can see at the end, the package is ready to go. There's a multi-locale package supporting all the languages of interest. There's a bit of a summary lined up for what's going to be presented. So there's a bit of a baseline experience for Windows 7 if the user happens to plug it in there. But it's mainly geared at Windows 8. So let's just peek behind the curtain a little bit of that tool. Make sure that you folks understand kind of what's going on. As I said, you shouldn't have to know about this, and we hope that you don't have to, but I just still kind of, because we're looking at the anatomy of all this, I want to make sure that you see how things relate. One of the files, as I mentioned earlier, in the device metadata package is the package info XML. There we can see that same vidpid that was presented, the device ID, in that INF. It's the same value. Here you can see that while this package will work in English as a baseline on down-level systems, on Windows 8, it has that new multi-locale support. And so it's fully localized for all languages for Windows 8. Going on in that file, you can see our, for some folks, familiar elements of other metadata, whether it's device stage or Windows info. We're going to come back to that software info in a moment because that's new. And there's that device experience ID. That's the same ID that you saw in the store manifest.xml file in the app. And finally, here's that new section I mentioned a moment ago. It's pretty simple. And what this does is it represents the name of the application in the store that actually is the companion app or the Metro-style device app for this device. So there's its name. In this case, the publisher happens to be Microsoft. The application ID, just like we talked about earlier. And that's it. That's what's required to bind these things together. So now that you've created all of these things and put them together and linked them together using these tools, then let's talk about what you need to think about in terms of planning for distribution. Now the good news is Windows is going to take care of distributing most everything for you. We're not going to sell your device. You'll have to take care of getting that into the user's hands. But for the software side, at least, we've got some things to help you out with. First of all, again, I want to emphasize, in order to help make sure the user is getting a seamless experience, we do want to make sure that the driver works well with Windows. And so we have collateral out there for you to use to validate your driver works, driver verifier, a bunch of certification tests, procedure. This is really about you and Microsoft working together to ensure that the user's expectations of that driver working well with Windows are met. And so please go ahead and take a look at doing that early on, and then you have to do that in order to get your driver ready to get distributed if you're doing a custom driver. So then go ahead and submit that driver to Windows via WinQual for distribution via Windows Update. Then go ahead and submit your app to the Windows Store, and you'll have heard about that in other sessions, and if not, then please go take a look at that offline. On the internet, those sessions will be posted. The store is not available right now, but it will be going forward. And then last, you can submit your device metadata packages to WinQual for distribution via Windows Metadata and Internet Services, what we also call WMIS. So the driver goes out to the user via WU. The app goes out to the user via the store. The device metadata goes out to the user via WMIS. The parts are all linked together in a way that you have designed and sort of engineered through the tools to make sure it works and comes together, as we talked about earlier. And the user will get it. Last, I just want to make a couple of points about updates. There are some considerations to keep in mind. One of the things about the device experience is that it can work with more than one device at a time. So if you have a family of devices that you want the same experience to work for, you have a common driver that works, for example, or even if you have just a common device experience in terms of the app, you can bind all of these things together. And so think about how you want one experience to work against potentially a collection of devices, a family of devices, or maybe all of the devices that you have. So you don't have to do one per. You can just do one for everything. And that's kind of powerful, and it also gives you a little bit more to think about. You might want to think about doing one at a time or growing the scope, or you might want to think about coming out with everything at once. One important consideration, and I want to emphasize this, is that drivers and apps actually are different. And so while we've blended the components together to create a device experience, they get updated in different ways. Windows doesn't automatically install driver updates. And in fact, users probably aren't going to go look to install a driver update. It's sort of an uncommon scenario, although it can happen. On the other hand, we fully expect users will want to update Metro-style apps because you'll want to add new features to those apps. And users will go and manually install those updates. So an important consideration here is you're planning your app and your driver story together, and particularly if you have custom functionality that may evolve. Be careful to be robust against different versions of drivers. Now, this is a common phenomenon already for folks who are doing custom drivers and custom apps. But I want to emphasize that we really aren't in a position to have solved everything here, and we haven't for this scenario. We do automatically install device metadata updates. And so as you have more devices you want to support, or different apps, or if you want to introduce an app later because you didn't introduce it when you first introduced the device, we will install up to one app once for the lifetime of a device installation. So you can think about how you can take advantage of that. You might want to get your device out there and then later add an app if it never has been installed. So as I promised, we should have some time for some questions. We've got about 20 minutes in a moment. I just want to quickly recap some of the things, the points that I brought up. The MetroStyle app, you really can differentiate your device, and Windows will distribute the software that makes that differentiation possible on your behalf. Your code gets into customers' hands automatically. You own all the pixels. You can integrate with Windows experiences. You can use the custom functionality in a privileged way. And you really have the power of these easy and comprehensive tools. It's not hard to develop a MetroStyle device app. There are a lot of moving parts under the covers that you have to line up. We've built tools to make that easy for you, we hope. And so we really would like to encourage you to consider doing it. There are a number of related sessions here. This will be available for you to take a look at. Some of these have already occurred. You can go take a look at them offline later if you weren't able to attend them. A couple of them are still coming up. Like I mentioned, there's a talk on specialized devices. There's a talk tomorrow on printing. Even if these aren't your device categories, it's potentially useful and valuable to go to these talks to see a little bit more in action about how some specific things were done. And you can think about how they extend to your own device category. And that's all I had. There is more documentation available. We're going to be continuing to release documentation on this topic. We have sort of the ability with the hardware folks to kind of get some new things out there with the Windows Hardware Developer Center. And so you'll be able to find some more things. There's a couple of papers that are coming already. One is on reimagining the device experience, and of course there's info out there on MetroStyle device apps. So with that, thank you very much, and I'd be very happy to take questions. And Eugene Lin is here also in case I get stumped by something and he can help out. So just come to the front and ask a question.
Hello, I have a question. Is all the drivers have to be updated through a store on Windows 8?
Do old drivers have to be updated?
Yes, if the version changes, that version of the driver changes, do we expect to update the driver through the...
Driver updates in Windows 8 will still be handled the same ways in Windows 7. Through Windows Update will be available to you. And obviously, any existing mechanism you have for distributing drivers will continue to work, although we would prefer that you use Windows Update since that's the cleanest one for customers.
Okay. Then why do we have to have the certificate from the store?
A certificate from the store for what? I'm not sure I understand your question.
In your presentation, you showed us there was we have to get the certificate from the store about the...
Are you asking that you have an existing driver that's available through Windows Update or to users?
No.
And you want to be able to create a MetroStyle app that works
Yes.
against that?
Yes.
That will work fine. You don't have to redo new devices if the driver works. Maybe we should take this offline. I want to make sure I understand your scenario. I think...
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We'll be here a little bit afterwards to take further questions.
So question about the interface between the driver and the app. So is it going to work with any kind of type of interface we have in our existing drivers, or are we going to have to rewrite new type of exposing interface?
It depends. We have, for supporting specialized devices, what we really have looked at is we've looked at device I/O control as a way, we've effectively modernized that. We've turned that into a COM object. And we now make it possible for a MetroStyle device app to use device I/O control to go and talk to your driver. And so most drivers that have functionality that's somewhat custom and kind of on its own, it'll just work fine. You have a little bit of work to do to kind of create the bridge component. And as I mentioned, George Rousas' talk talks about how to do that. We believe that most drivers that fit into this category don't have to change at all. And there's simply a new bit that has to get added into the INF to let us know that you have intended it to be used this way. Mm-hmm. And so one of our colleagues, Nar Ganapathy, walks through an existing Win7 driver that works just this way, and he adds one little bit effectively to the INF, and that's all that's required. So you don't have to rewrite your driver, but we are asking for you to essentially attest that, yes, this is supposed to be usable and functional in the context of a Metro-style app.
Okay, because we have a scenario it's a little bit borderline. We put filter drivers on system class devices. So.
Such as like HID or
Yeah.
WinUSB or something. Yeah, for that case, it's more complex because we don't really have APIs for accessing those.
So we create raw PDOs on the side.
Yeah, and so what I would encourage you to go to that talk, and if you can't,
The specialized.
what's that? The specialized devices, and they've actually got some advice for how to handle those particular cases. You bet. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, is there any support for compatible IDs in the device metadata?
No, we don't support compatible IDs. The problem with that, we actually kind of had a bit of an error in doing that in Win 7, and someone, I think, accidentally submitted a device metadata package for compatible ID, and then everybody, turns out, all of a sudden got that device metadata package. So we've got some checks in place now to not allow for that. Sort of makes sense. I hope you understand. Yeah.
I've got an app right now that doesn't need the device to work, but can access a device.
Mm-hmm.
So can I still post that app along with all the needed IDs for the device support to the App Store and then submit the driver later and have it all seamlessly work? So if the app was already installed before
Yes,
the
you can do
device
that.
was connected, everything's cool?
You can do that. The one thing that it will be a gap is that there's that special file that you need to have in your app, which is the store manifest file that has the device experience ID in it. And so if you want to, you could now put a GUID in there and just kind of hold that for the future. You don't have to do anything with the device system in the meantime. And if everyone's well behaved, that GUID will be a GUID, and it'll be globally unique, and it'll just be there for your use in the future. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. And then just a follow-up, and I think it blends with the previous question. I currently use like WinUSB just to provide just bulk endpoint access.
Yeah,
and that's part of the 4 o'clock talk.
Yeah, I think so. And it's really challenging for us to look at in George and NAR, we'll get into this in more detail, but WinUSB and HID in particular, we're still looking at scenarios there, but what we've got for you right now is really a recommendation to go look at device I/O control, and it does mean some surgery in how you look at things, but we've got some advice on how to look at doing that.
Okay.
So, but the good news is that you can still get access to your device. It's just that we've got a little bit more work you may need to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir.
So related to that previous question, actually, what happens? Do you have kind of a way to prevent software vendor to register packages and experiences that don't belong to their hardware? We actually had experience with Windows Update where people have uploaded packages that contain our PIDs and were messing up our devices on the field.
That's right. And so really with that, we have technical tools to deal with what really you've described as, which we look at as a business problem. And so when someone goes and does something for things that don't belong to them, we have to kind of play fair and figure out what the thing belongs to whom. And so we actually keep a registry of identities. So the first order problem should be solved for in the sense that if it's not your vid PID, no one should be able to get access to it. But it turns out there's some policing that has to be done. And so if you've got a complaint, we have a process that you can bring forward, and we know how to effectively revoke existing mechanisms, start things afresh, and kind of get things started again. But it really is kind of a business problem in the sense that, just like you said, someone else kind of took your thing, right? So we have to approach it that way. We don't know in advance about the problem. So we do have a way for dealing with it, and we've dealt with that quite a bit. It turns out most people play pretty fair, but not everyone does all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you one last point about that. Our model really is kind of about trust but verify. And it's basically designed around creating some disincentives for people where they're abusing the system. And so we hope that people will be pretty well behaved from that. Go ahead, sir.
So I've got a couple of questions about the life cycle of the metadata file.
Sure.
So could you tell me again how that file gets distributed? And also if the file gets changed and the application name in the file, in the metadata file gets changed, what happens with that?
So the file can get distributed in a number of ways. We have support for that file being pre-installed in an OEM scenario. So for example, the file can be submitted to WinQual, then you can go and just get it yourself after it's been signed. And if you're an OEM, you can just install it, or if you're working with an OEM, you can give it to them to pre-install it. The store similarly has a pre-install story for apps, and Metro-style device apps are just Metro-style apps, and they'll participate in that story. And so there's a way to essentially get your PC set up in advance to be able to handle certain things within the policies that are sort of permitted there. The other approach is that the other question that you had is around the application ID. We really only install one device app once for device installation. And so at the moment in time that the user installs the device, we go and we take a look at what the current state of the world is. So we try to find the most current metadata file. If the most current one happens to be on WMIS and not on the computer, then we'll go get the WMIS one if we have connectivity. If the other way around is the case, that would be kind of odd. So we really never have that reverse case. But there is a scenario where there might not be connectivity at the time that things are being set up, and so you may use that older file. And so these are kind of all edge conditions. But what we try to do is we try to figure out what the state of the universe is as best we can, as quickly as we can. And in some cases, we can't do it immediately. We may, for example, not be able to find device metadata. It may be that the user is behind some connectivity barrier we can't find to get to WMIS. And so we'll wait, and we'll remember that for that particular device, we haven't seen metadata yet. But let's assume that we've seen metadata, and in that metadata, there is an app that's been identified. We'll take a look at that app, and we'll try to go get it from the store. You might not be able to get access to the store right now. So we'll wait until we can get access to the store and pull that app down, assuming that app still exists. If it's been deleted, then of course we've tried, and so then we're done. But if we're successful, we'll pull that app down, we'll install it, and then we'll be done with installation. That's what we're trying to offer you, and what we're trying to offer users is that when you connect that device, you get all the software you're supposed to get at that moment in time. Now let's say you go and change the device metadata file to point at a different app. Well, if you do that, you're changing the future, not the past. So that user already has that app. We're not going to attempt to install a new app. But for a new user who's installing that device in the future, they're going to see that new file, they're going to see that new identity, and they're going to get that new app. So that's how it works. Driver update's different. We don't do driver updates. We'll still go ahead and get the current driver. The driver applies at the same point, which is that, if you make a change in your driver, well, we'll get that current version of the driver. But if there's an update that you've made, we're not going to go and change the past unless the user goes and manually installs that driver.
So I put a new version of the driver on WMIS, the end user downloads that driver and installs it. Will you go through the metadata again and update the application?
No. Which is why it's important in your app to be robust against driver versions.
You said the metadata.
Let's use the microphone so that we can record it for posterity, please.
Could you elaborate a little bit, Max, about the privileges, what the regular application can do, say, with respect to sending that I/O control versus the matched application can do?
Yep, I can talk about that a little bit, but I really do encourage you to get into the 4 o'clock session with George and NAR, where they'll go into that in some more detail. The way that privileging works is that in the device metadata schema, there is a way for not only specifying the app that is the companion app, but the app that has privilege. And we actually have a little bit of extra. We let you have a couple of apps that can have privilege because there's an upgrade scenario and a few things like that. But that app, which is typically going to be the app that's the companion app that's installed with the device, is uniquely able to get access to restricted device functionality, because we have a device broker, and what the device access broker does is at the time that a request is made to access functionality that's been marked as restricted, we actually take a look to see, well, who are you as an app? And if you're the app that has the privilege, then the access is permitted. And if you're the app that doesn't have the privilege, then the access is not permitted.
So we can mark some IO controls as restricted.
Absolutely.
Others are not.
Yep. But there was a couple of questions still here. I don't think you had a follow-up on, or I can happy take this afterwards.
Maybe I would have a different question. That's how this could work with the devices which are not plug and play, like the SPI devices on the system chip.
This is SPI devices. This is internal devices.
So you're talking about internal devices inside a PC. So the mechanism that we use to automatically install Metro-style device apps is targeted at devices that are outside of the PC. For devices that are inside of the PC, we continue to provide OEMs with ways of pre-installing drivers, metadata, and Metro-style apps, as well as existing Win32 apps, so that a user who gets a PC has everything working out of the box.
So another way to think about this is that devices that are connected over SPI or I2C or what have you are actually internal to the PC device container. The PC device container has a unique identity, and it will have a unique device metadata package. And the components inside that device are not relevant really for installation or for privileging. It's possible to have, let me put this back on, it's possible to privilege a number of apps that can use internal components to the PC. So for example, I'm just pick one, let's say you've got a fingerprint reader, and you only want your Metro app, Metro-style app, to be able to use that fingerprint reader. And you've created a driver that uses the specialized access functions that George and Nara are going to talk about. And you want that Metro-style app to be able to access that. And no other app will be able to. Well, that's possible because the PC device container can declare that Metro-style app that is your fingerprint app as privileged for the PC. And it can then use any interface internal to the PC that is marked as restricted. And so you don't need to worry about further identification.
Okay, and how is that done, actually? What do I need to do to declare the device container?
Right, and so this is why I don't want to steal all the thunder from the talk that's at 4, but we actually have a lot of detail about how to do that, and we have a pretty nice white paper that's just getting published this week that'll walk you through how to do that. And so what Nara is going to take you through is actually all the mechanics and what you do on the driver, and there's going to be talk about the internal devices as well.
So that's 4 p.m.?
Yeah, I believe so, 4 p.m. Metro-style device apps for specialized devices is the title. Eugene's going to double check the time. Maybe one more question, and I'll be available afterwards, but I think we have to clear the room out. So.
As far as the device metadata creation with the wizard, you can do that for Windows 7 as well.
Yeah, the metadata tool does support the Windows 7 schema. It's more optimized for the Windows 8 schema, but it's got some stuff in there. And we actually have now some other tools that work well with the Windows 7 schema for device stage and such.
We will have to still create each localization for Windows 7.
Yep, you can do that if you want to.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I know there's a lot to gather. One of the things I'll try to leave you with is that, you know, there's a lot of material here that we're giving you this week, and one of the things that we're trying to do is really introduce you to that material. We're available. When we say feedbacks and questions in the forums, we mean it. This is a complicated set of topics and how these things interact, and we really want to help you be successful in doing it, and so we and the team are sort of ready to help out and answer questions. If there's things that we can answer or things that we don't know about, that we'll get on top of that and get you info so you can actually take action. And if you've got some things that you think are missing, let us know, and we'll see if we can do something about that before we wrap Windows 8 up. Because I really want to sincerely emphasize how important it is to work together with you to deliver these solutions to our customers. So thank you very much for coming today.